the Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, joining you from the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. Those are the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, commonly known as Victoria, BC, Canada. My guest today is Maris Bergrune. Maris is a ritual animist, a spirit worker, a sound medium, and a singer-musician. I've taken two of her programs, one on Norse animism and ritual, and one on Seidr mediumship, and we'll talk about them in detail today. Maris teaches skill development in intuition perception, boundaries and discernment, and offers a very good foundation in animist ritual, and also, I guess, what we'd call relational practices with the other than human worlds. She focuses on developing healthy relationships with spirits and ancestors, and also on accessing self-sovereignty and voice. As you'll hear in this interview, her practice is characterized by this very clear intention to partner with only the most compassionate aspects of spirit. I find her approach very grounded and practical, and she's clear that this approach is not a way to bypass the challenges of humanity, but are rather ways to be deeply resourced while facing these challenges. So I've wanted to have Maris on the show since well before pandemic, when I was taking her program. So I was super excited that she remembered me and agreed to come on the show. Just quickly before we get started, though, I want to share that if you like the content of this episode, I think you'll like my Yuletide Folk Fest program. It's a 12-day mini course that runs from December 21st, so winter solstice, through January 1st, where each day you receive a 10 to 20 minute podcast and a 3 to 4 minute meditation. It's all about the folklore and history of Yuletide traditions. It runs for 12 days because in this framework, the 12 days of Yuletide are a replay of the year in miniature. So it's an extended practice of self-reflection to help us end the year well, with good closure and feeling in flow with the rhythm of the turn of the year. So stay tuned to the end of the podcast for details about how to join. And now I hope you enjoy my conversation with Maris. So Maris, what identities do you lead with?
Yes. I like to kind of think more perhaps in terms of like guiding principles, or what kind of threads of my life have been present and drive me to do what I do. And along with that comes certain identifiers, definitely, which I'll get to as well. I have for a long time been driven by the desire to know how things work. As a child, that's really drove what I did in school, and that drove my choice of what I did in college and beyond. I was interested in the natural world, animals in particular, and plants, but just like, what is this world in which we live in, and how does it work? And what do I do with that information? And how can that inform me in my life? I've also been, for a long time, driven by my own healing path. And that was a big part, especially of my earlier years. And so a lot of that had to do with personal transformation and the transformation of my experience in the world and my consciousness. And so I'm very much into that, the transformation of consciousness. And I'm very much driven. I consider myself, the term of the day is animist. So a lot of what I do has to do with animist principles. I like to call it animist sensibilities, which has to do with kind of being in the world from a place of relationality and communication with the broader world, and with an eye for reciprocity as well on that. So what's the exchange that's happening constantly? What am I doing? What is the impact of my actions? And how can I be present in the world from a place of greater wisdom, understanding, reciprocity, and right relationship? Because of my healing path and then those kind of animist sensibility aspects of things, I was trained originally and continue to have a big part of my practice being spirit mediated and having to do with the contact with the unseen world and relationships with spirits. And as a part of that, I practice a version of mediumship, which we may talk about later.
For sure.
But, and I'm a ritualist, so I'm a ritual animist. And ritual for me has to do with not just with, say, doing a formal ritual or an intentional ritual, but again, it's a bit about how I live. I like to think of organic as being ritual as being organic and being just part of day-to-day life. And so to that end, I teach that form of ritual. I also teach how to have more formal ritual practices. I teach about how to communicate with spirits and be in relationship with spirits and other aspects of the unseen world, some of which have seen components like plant people and animal people, for example. And a major focus of my identity within that and my practice is that is boundaries as well, how to have healthy boundaries with all of this and how to have discernment within all of this and how to have healthy relationships and have it be a source of resourcing and support and goodness in life.
I really resonate with so much. This is why I'm so excited that you came on the show. I've been tracking your work for a long time and really enjoyed the courses I took with you. So I'm super excited to go deeper into this. So could you describe in a little bit more detail, you talked about your mediumship practice. How did that work evolve for you? And are there specific lineages that you're drawing upon?
Yes. So I came to that work. Well, it depends on how you're defining mediumship, actually.
How do you define it?
Yes. So the common understanding of mediumship is that it's about speaking with deceased people. And that's certainly an application of it that's well known and widely known. I take a more broader view of it, and I say it's actually a part of consciousness and consciousness to consciousness communication that can involve any type of consciousness, not just deceased people, and also is an extension of daily life again. So again, you can, of course, specialize in it and develop that aspect of yourself strongly and maybe become professional or use it professionally in some way. But I do see it as a part of everyone's reality and potential and a part of day-to-day life and an extension of intuition, what we would call intuition. I learned the particular version that has been my foundation from a woman named Betsy Bergstrom, who practices in Seattle. My understanding is that she was influenced strongly by spiritualism, the spiritualist movement, and which was a group who used mediumship rather heavily and have for I think over 100 years. Yeah. So a while. And but what Betsy did was she took some of she's really great at creating kind of adapting ritual practices and technology for other purposes or for broader purposes. And in this case, what she developed was a way of working within a group often, although you can work as a solo person as well, doing a group setting that doesn't involve one medium being the focus, but actually involves everyone in the group being mediumistic and kind of sharing the group field and being able to give voice to their little piece of whatever is coming through, as well as being able to use this to speak, to again, communicate with and in a really deep way, actually, with spirits of different types. So for example, you could do this with an angelic being or the Seidr spirit, that kind of thing. And one of the things about it that I loved about it that really stood out to me was the fact that we're not just communicating. So it's not just about having conversations with these beings, but it's actually more about getting to know their consciousness. It's actually about sharing their consciousness for a time. And one of the things I love about that is that one, it gets me out of kind of a human-centric way of viewing consciousness. But it for me has been a big lesson in being human-centric in my consciousness. And it's been a real gift to be able to actually, at least partially to some extent, experience how other conscious beings are and how they perceive, and getting being able to get a direct sense of their wisdom in that way.
That's amazing. Go ahead. Did you want to say more about that?
I've also, just other lineages or teachers that I've, because I actually can't trace lineages that far. Right. These days, it's kind of the teachers that I work with, but I also have learned a lot from Tom Kenyon, who does sound mediumship. And my initial training way back in the day was in something akin to core shamanism. So that kind of practice as well.
Interesting. So, but you didn't grow up in a spiritual household, quite the opposite, which you've written about. You have a great essay about that on your website. But did you have early childhood experiences then, direct experiences that piqued your curiosity? Like, how did you come to be so attuned to the more than?
I can look back and say, these experiences that I didn't have a context for, like now I have a context for them. For example, I'm pretty sure I was harassed by spirits every night in my bedroom.
Oh, I know a lot of listeners are going to relate to this. Oh my gosh, how many of my clients come to me with this? Oh, it's so interesting to look back and realize that.
Yes, absolutely. And now I'm just like, oh, no, I know what was happening. I slept under the covers until I left for college, honestly. That was how I slept. And I was very much in tune with animals and with the natural world. I had friends who were trees and stuffed animals. And again, looking back, I'm like, oh, okay, I was actually knew that they were conscious and present, and I had relationships at that time, but I had no context for it, absolutely none. These were the days prior to the internet. So you got information from your family, from maybe the library, depending on what books were available in your peer group, and that was it for the most part. And so I didn't have a context for it. Looking back, I was also a sensitive child, and now it makes sense. But what really drove me, the way I found this work was, again, the pursuit of my own healing. I was badly depressed for about 20 years, I think, almost, and I was driven to find a solution for that and a way out. And so that eventually got me I went from graduate school in neurobiology to acupuncture school. And then when I was in acupuncture school, I met the woman who became my teacher, who kind of initiated me into spirit work. And I was seeing her initially for healing. And I, again, didn't think of myself as someone who would do this kind of thing, because I hadn't had any like big major blow, like visions or, anything like that I remember as a child. But then this teacher put on a soul purpose workshop. And I was like, that sounds like a good thing to take. And
sign me up. How much?
Up, right. It was a Friday through Sunday. And her kind of methods were a little bit throw you in the deep end. So she was like, a lot of people who are totally new to any of this, she was like, all right, now you're going to do readings for each other. Now you're going to do a drum journey. Now here's this purification ceremony tonight that you're going to go do. And we were like, whoa, what is happening? Some people were like really stressed out about it. I'm sure I was to some extent too. Like, I don't know how to do this. Like, what do you mean? And, but it worked. That was the thing. It worked and we could do it. And even though it was really challenging, it was the best experience I'd had in my life at that point. I was like, yeah, this is for me.
Nice.
And that got me into trading.
Wow, that's amazing. So, okay, so you're a very different person now than you were, say, when you went to college. Is it difficult then now to relate to your family context? Like they must be like, wow, we did not see this coming.
They did not see this coming. I give them props for the amount of tolerance that is present. They support me, and they don't understand what I do. And there's a little bit of a don't ask, don't tell, a little bit aspect of things where I'm like laying it on them. Right. They know where to find me. They know kind of the general terrain. And so, So I feel like for me, it's been about, respecting their boundaries with it. And as long as they respect mine, it seems, as far as I know. So it was a little hard feeling like that I'm totally, I guess some amount of black sheep kind of syndrome. They've always been supportive. They've never, so there wasn't rejection that I felt from my family, but I didn't feel like I fit until I did ancestral work, actually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which has been a major part of my life for about the past 5 years. And then it made sense to me. So the way I think about it is I didn't make sense in the context of my immediate family, as far as I could tell, at least, but it did make sense in the context of my ancestry. And so that's also helped take a little bit of a charge out of any disconnect that's been created.
Yeah. I imagine it also helps put the 20-year depression in context.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Well, since then you've written that this is a quote from one of your blogs. Psychic perception is not a gift that some are born with. It is a characteristic of consciousness. So can you say more about that for folks who might also be unsure of their own psychic ability? Maybe right now there's people listening being like, oh, yeah, but that's okay for her. Her family supports her, or that's okay for her. She found that teacher, but maybe that doesn't apply to me.
Well, I also would have said it didn't apply to me. That's the thing. Before I met this teacher, I would have definitely said that doesn't apply to me. I would not have used any of these labels for myself at all. So here's kind of how I look at it. I think, culturally speaking, at least in the West, the United States, maybe in particular, even that's my major frame of reference. We have been a part of what's happened ancestrally for us, for a lot of people at least, is a distancing from this as normal. So there was a time, probably in most of our, if not all of our ancestries, where it was considered completely normal to be able to communicate with the unseen world, what we call intuition or extensions of that. And then things happened over time, cultural shifts, etc., happened to make that, make it not okay for that to be happening in a lot of lineages, at least. And part of that now is that the way, things come up then is, well, part of what happened, I think, as a result of that is that the people who are really in tune with it early on, and then maybe in a bigger way, stand out. The virtuosos, kind of the ones who are born to do it for a living from an early age too, right? Stand out to us. And then we take that as being some people have a special gift, but we still have our own largely ancestral dissociation from it. And then it's easy to say, but I don't. But I would venture, of course, this is not going to apply to everybody, but I remember a client I had who came for a reading, and I was just really resistant to the reading the whole time. And I was kind of like, gosh, I wonder why she's here. This is really interesting. And then finally, and I was kind of at my wit's end too, a little bit, because it's like, I don't know what to do with this, in this situation. And I was a young practitioner, of course, too. I'm like, I'm failing. And psychic fail too, because it's hard for me to read when people are, I actually can't really read when people are resistant. There's a boundary there that I definitely respect, and I personally can't cross. So, or wouldn't want to even. But but then I finally asked her, I was like, well, how about you? Have you had any experiences like this? And she totally had. She spoke for several minutes about all these experiences she had. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. She's totally had all these, everything she's in doubt about, she's actually experienced herself. And so I just think we have some stuff to work through as culturally and generally speaking. And it can take some time and effort and getting through insecurity. Because I think a lot of people I definitely was. And in the first year training that I did, with a lot of people in the same boat in that regard, it was just like pressure's on a bit, and insecurity was part of the developmental process. So I think it's important to not expect it to just be us to be virtuosic with it right away.
Mm-hmm.
I also think there's some misconceptions about it, especially because again, we kind of get informed through media and like TV shows and that kind of treatment. It's not information on demand. It's not that we can just be like, yeah, I want to know this and I'm going to know this. That's not actually, in my experience, what it is at all. So, our expectations about it can also kind of help us get jammed up. There's a lot of things that can help us get jammed up with regards to this kind of in this domain, and those are some.
Well, and you've also talked about having a variety of teachers, and sometimes it's like any kind of learning environment. Rapport is really important, relationship is really important, and there might be one teacher that one person is just like, yep, that's really easy for me to learn in their context, and somebody else who just spends the entire time irritated, dysregulated, critiquing, in resistance, whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, that just might not be a good fit. Like maybe you have to move, you got to date a few teachers as well. That's actually one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show, is because I really, really dug your teaching style with particularly a course called Language, Myth, and Magic. And in that course, your academic orientation was very evident. And that's so my jam that I was like, I love her. It's interesting because it's one of the few areas of my life where I will like kind of sit and be quiet and receive and like kind of just be the quiet student, is when I'm like really loving the teacher. And your uses of primary sources is actually pretty extraordinary as far as like modern self-directed spirituality goes. There's a lot of kind of secondhand and third-hand and fourth-hand information that suddenly becomes entombed and enshrined, whereas actually, even though we have the internet and all this access to primary sources, it actually is pretty difficult, I find, in sort of this wave we're catching historically in self-directed spirituality, whatever you want to call it, paganism, witchcraft, wherever you're taking that. So thank you for that. That was really fantastic. So kind of leaping off of that, I would like you to share with folks just a bit about like, what is the Poetic Edda, specifically the Voluspa, and how did you learn so much about the Norse sagas? How did you come to be studying these primary sources and interpreting them? Even comparing them, you were like, oh, this version of this translation is like this, and that translation's like that. I was like, how does she know this? How do you know this?
Yeah. So this was definitely influenced by my time in science, absolutely, because what we do is we read primary sources, and secondary sources can be really helpful to give overviews of material, but to write a research paper, you have to look at the primary sources. So one of the practices I studied with Betsy Bergstrom is called Seidr. Seidr is, among other things, a trance mediumship practice that is attested to in the medieval Norse literature. And so we're talking about things that were written down starting in the 1200s, and the bulk of the material coming from the 1200s to the 1400s. This includes the sagas, this includes some poetry that's put in compilations today, one of which is called the Poetic Edda. So I was in training, I did a training in Seidr with Betsy Bergstrom. This is a practice that taps into the Norse powers. So you start working with people like Odin and Freya and Thor. And I was not interested in any of these people prior to this because of their treatment in modern media. I wasn't interested, frankly. But then I did Seidr, and I was like, oh, this is rather different than what I expected. And I fell in love with Seidr, and it's a big part of my practice these days. I consider it an ancestral tradition and a big part of my work. So yes, so I met these spirit people through Seidr, and I wanted to learn more about them. And I was hearing about them as well. And I was hearing bits of information and looking online, that kind of thing, and different people saying different things. And then my science training, my analytical self kicks in and says, wait a second, one person says this, another person says this. Like, where's this coming from?
Mm-hmm.
And what did the sources of this information actually say? And so I started looking and found that, not unexpectedly, a lot of the ways things are presented today is, in my view at least, not an accurate representation of how they were being presented, at least in this time frame that we have some information from. And while I feel like modern relationships and interpretations have a place, I like to know the difference, and that often isn't present. So I like to know what actually is sourced from this medieval set of the medieval information, and what is not. And that distinction I find is largely not present. And so I just had to be in my bonnet, or what the saying would be, to learn the distinctions. And I also became then really curious about what these practices were, how they were represented in this literature. And it's, what you find is that it's a lot more nuanced than a lot of people like. I think we tend to like things to be very concrete and literal. That's not what you get. There's variety in the sources. There isn't like, this is just how it is, and here's the formula, and here's the how-to manual. It doesn't come that way. But it also helped for me to access the work of Maria Kvilhaug. She has a book called The Seed of Yggdrasil. And she is brilliant at taking the literature. She knows the literature far more in depth than I do. And she interprets it in a way that really made it come to life for me. So my inhibitions about it, my like, oh, it's like a patriarchy in the sky kind of thing, and all of that. And why would I want to know and even get into this at all? She presents it in a way that brings out the wisdom tradition aspect of it. And it was like soul food, that book. And she does videos as well for those who prefer that format. And that really opened it up. That is what enabled me to really get into it and be interested in it and stay interested in
it. Okay, what is the Voluspa? Who are the Norns? Let's give people a little more of the fun parts of Seidr. And maybe could you even describe, like, what would Seidr look like in practice? I'm also curious if you could put in there how much of your practice of Seidr is fairly directly taken from the literature, and how much have you received from the guides you work with and the deities?
Okay. And feel free to redirect me, because this can...
I'm just going to let you riff. This is like jazz. I'm just going to let you riff. Yeah.
So from the medieval Norse literature, what remains to this day, and there's a lot that was lost. So it's a selection of things that existed. What we have from that is a description of a practice that varies often in the sagas too. So these are narrative. This is prose narrative. So the descriptions of Seidr in the sagas, what people notice is that there are common elements. So the descriptions are not always the same, and what's happening is not always the same, but sometimes there's similar elements to what's being described. And it is, for example, things that are described include weather working. Includes the practitioners going into a trance state, because what's described as like their bodies lay as if asleep or dead, while their consciousness is somewhere else doing something else, often combat magic, because these are sagas, and so they're very combat driven. And there's also, in a few instances, Seidr practitioners doing oracular sittings and being asked to prophesize for a community or do an oracular sitting of some kind. And so what people noticed when they went to the sources and were reading about Seidr is that, well, some things are repeated. And that has become a template for modern practice. So we don't know exactly what they were doing. These are prose narratives. The presence of a Seidr practitioner is there for a narrative purpose. Yeah, again, it's not a how-to for 10 generations, in the future who become interested in this. And so people who started to develop, modern people who started to develop this practice again, and my understanding is that this was starting in particular in Denmark, a group led by Annette Host for a few decades now. And what they did was they had like core shamanism training and that kind of thing, but they started to look into what would Seidr be in particular. And so what's come from that, it has been the following template that's utilized. So, well, first of all, it's connection with the Norse powers. And that I think is, in any form of ritual, it's the connection to powers. And I say powers because that can mean astrological powers, and configuration, seasonal powers, as well as spirits, deities, that kind of figure, the world tree. And first of all, we develop relationships with those beings, and that is what gives ritual power. One of the main things that gives ritual power. And then the template is the use of also a staff as a medicine ally. The use of song to sing yourself into trance, or to sing yourself on a journey, or for people to sing you on a journey, as the case may be. And I'll describe that in just a minute more. So they all start with S, which is really convenient. Staffs, song, seat. So an elevated platform or seat by which the practitioner would practice. This could be outdoors, and if it's outdoors, it's often described as like some kind of platform. I don't know how they raise platforms, but they handy, I guess, in that way. Yeah. Could go out and raise a platform.
Good with a little hand axe there. Yeah.
And then in a hall, it would be the high seat. So it'd be the place where like the head of the hall, the chieftain, perhaps would sit. And so sometimes the ritual sometimes is called a high seat for that reason. But anyway, an elevated place, which is actually not uncommon for oracular practice, for oracles to either be higher than usual or lower than usual, so subterranean or on a mountain or elevated in some way. And then there's also sitting out, so a practice of going out into nature, doing a nature sitting, communing with nature in some way. So that's the template that is utilized today to perhaps distinguish Seidr a bit as a practice. It does feel different from the other practices I do. And then as part of that modern day practice, we do a ritual high seat. And what that can look like is any number of practitioners, but usually 1 to 3, perhaps, how many, depending on how many you have for the, doing a sitting, and they can sit simultaneously and connect with the powers and bring through wisdom and healing for people. So that's roughly what it would be.
Yeah. I had the experience of just like a small ritual of that in a different program that you were teaching, and I found it very beautiful and very touching, particularly the music. So can you talk a little bit more about the role of music and singing in Seidr, and where your songs have come from? Again, that's not something that easily gets translated 1,000 years later, right? So
it does not.
Where does the music, what about the words? Where are they coming from?
Yes. Well, that's one of the things that we run into is and there could be a yearning for the songs that were. And what I've been told by spirits in conversation around these things is they're like, well, the songs are different, but the notes are the same. Yeah. You're still singing, and the pitches, they're like, it's like, okay, and ritual has to start somewhere. And we can still access ritual songs. Again, they may not be exactly the same as they were, but they can come from the same place, in the sense of we can have the intention to create a song for a purpose and work it into a ritual tradition and have it become a part of that. And in Seidr, there are indications that singing, it was a part of Seidr, at least, again, not in every description. So we don't know if it was always considered a part of it. There's also a related practice called Galver, which means actually a sung spell or something of that nature. So very much involves sound of some kind. We know almost nothing about Galver. But again, if we look at how sound is used ritually, we can use it as such within a Seidr context. So what's happened with Seidr is that there is a song I learned called the Journey Song, and that was created by someone whose name I can't think of in this moment, but by someone who's a practitioner, and then was passed to Betsy Bergstrom, who taught it to us. So there's a song we use there. And then sound, another aspect of ritual sound. So there's like songs that you can use for a ritual purpose, and that can become tied to that ritual purpose. And then there's sound channeling, which may be more of what Galver was, and can be a part of any kind of practice of this kind. They use a sound, which is that you connect to the deep self, to the spirits that you're connecting with, and you sing from there, you make sound from there. And you sing yourself on a journey, and that song can then be variable, and it maybe not be the same every time. And in fact, it won't be the same every time in that context. But because I have a background in music as well, I was trained in classical violin when I was young. I know a little piano, but I've loved music since I was a child and been interested in creating it. I've taken the additional step of creating music from the medieval poetry, the medieval Norse poetry as well. And you're mentioning the Voluspa before. And the Voluspa, that name means the prophecy of the Vulva. A Vulva is a staff-carrying seeress who is a Seidr practitioner as well. There's overlap in those terms. And often the person to be doing these oracular sittings. And there's a whole poem that is it's a cosmological poem that's called The Prophecy of the Vulva. And in that, it's a vulva speaking a prophecy to the god Odin. And in that poem, she recounts what was present before this world was created, the creation of this world, some major mythological components, things that happened, and then Ragnarok, the destruction of the world, followed by the rebirth again of the world. So this poem is a cosmological cycle, and that I've set to music. I decided I was going to make songs out of. So I take every few stanzas and look for ones that fit together coherently, and have made songs out of them.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Where do the Norns fit into this cosmology?
Yes, the Norns. So there are three primary Norns, or three Norns that are actually mentioned in the Voluspa and the Urda, Verdande, and Skuld. Urda means origin, Verdande means becoming, and Skuld means shall, or that which shall be, in a sense. And they're often related to the fates, but they seem slightly different. They are involved in what's called Urlog, which can be thought of as fate. And so they're involved in that aspect of the cosmos. They're considered elder beings. They're not quite human. And they're very magical to work with. And they, I think, actually form the foundation for a lot of the Seidr work. Seidr, there's no direct references to this, so this is a modern interpretation, but Seidr is considered to have these elements of working with the becoming aspect of fate. So that which you can do in this moment that may shape the trajectory of the future. And so in some ways it's rooted in the Norns. Also in the literature, it is said that everyone has a personal Norn.
So exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this can be considered maybe an aspect of their fate, or someone, a being who is involved in that aspect of who we are to some degree. But yeah, they're wonderful to work with. And sometimes when we do a high seat sitting, especially if we have three practitioners, we will sit as the Norns.
Mm.
Um,
Intentionally taking on one of their characteristics, or you're just calling them in and then see how it kind of shakes out, who wants to sing or speak through who?
Yeah, it's what tends to happen. It doesn't seem to be as neat as that, for one person being one Norn, but more like it's a collective conscious in a way. And the sitters will have different angles to that. Who's who, I think, would be a little bit hard to say. But yeah, what we're doing is we're connecting with them and Seidr. So in my mediumship work, there's a range of degrees of kind of communion with the spirits. Most of my mediumship is not actually a spirit being involved in my body to any extent. So just to note that. Seidr is a little bit more, I'm conscious, it's consensual, and I work only with the most wise and compassionate aspects of spirits, so it's healthy and safe to do this way. But I will give more of my body and my voice potentially to the beings then in this particular context. This is a form of transmediumship that goes a little deeper and a little further than my other mediumship practices do. And then we will be giving voice to what's coming through.
Can you spell the sound practice that you go? What was it?
Yeah, Galver. So it's like Seidr. There's a TH sound that's in an inconvenient place for English speakers, but it's GAL. You'll find it if you look up GALDR.
Right.
So that's English, the anglicized version of it. Yeah. But that D is actually a curly D, and it's a TH sound. Okay. So it's actually a different letter.
So interesting to have a word like that. So I'm relating it to personal experiences I've had with sound and song coming through. So I spent a couple of years learning Scottish Gaelic songs, and particularly some keening and lament songs. And I don't know, just came through, just hit me like a real deep arrow at some point that I was like, oh my gosh, this music. I heard it once and was like, I have to learn what they're saying. I have to learn that, and so I did. My lineage is Scottish Highlanders. And so I have had that experience where I heard somebody singing a little passage from the Carmina Gadelica. I heard her on YouTube. I thought I had taken that song and started singing it. And then I brought it to my Gaelic singing teacher and was like, oh, you know this song? And I started singing it. She was like, I'm familiar with those words, but that is not the tune. She said it nicely, but she's like, that's not the tune. And I was like, no, for sure it is. I learned it from this. And she was like, no, you're singing it beautifully. That's just not the song, but go ahead and do that. And I went back and watched the video again and was like, oh, wow. Yeah, no, totally. I'm singing a totally different song, but with the same words as this other woman. So then I went back for another singing lesson with my teacher and was like, Sheena, is this a different tune? And she was like, no, it's so gorgeous and beautiful. You should keep singing that. The old ones are singing through you. That's your way to sing that song. It is nothing like the woman on YouTube, but that is, the old ones are singing through you. That is your song. You should sing that song. And I was like, okay. And it, so that's how I sing that song. Whereas in a different context, I was doing a sit out. I was on quest in this particular space, this bioregion. And as I was walking through the forest, I hit a invisible border where I had this very strong impulse, this instruction really from the land that was basically halt, who goes there? You need to introduce yourself. And I sort of stopped. And what came out was this musical sound. And it was just a sound. It wasn't words. It was just this series of notes. And in my mind and in my body and my soul, it felt like, this is my name. This is me saying, hi, I'm Carmen. This is who I am. And so that name, I call it my name song. And it's what I do now whenever I'm traveling in a new place and I'm sensing okay, I'm with these other beings and I want to announce who I am. I will sing to the mountain or sing to the forest, but it's not words. It's just like literally just like, hey, but with notes. And so I'm sort of seeing that as like, if you're in relationship and in reciprocity, these are practices that I believe will just naturally happen. They like happen to you, or you allow something to happen. And then it's so wonderful to come across literature that says, oh yeah, that's the thing. We have a name for it. We had a whole tradition. It's like, yeah, we know, young one, we know.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. So that's, anyway, I just want to share that because that's like such a very cool affirmation, and maybe other people have had something similar, Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I think an important element of that is allowing yourself to do it. Because again, I think we can get caught up in like, what were the songs? What's the right thing to sing? What's the right way to sing? What's the right way to do this? When it really is about being in the moment and, being in a place of heart and authenticity and good intention, and being connected and tuned in and see what kind of comes up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense to me that like none of us want to appropriate or overstep or like be disrespectful, but there's kind of also a balance where, like you said, there's like a good intentions actually do matter, and matter quite a bit if you're listening and approaching in a good way. You also mentioned about how you only work with the compassionate aspects of different deities, those like wise and compassionate aspects. And in your teaching, I've heard you even include references to Rupert Sheldrake's research on morphogenetic fields. And so I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that with listeners, because it's, it's kind of like a background item for me too, where it's like I've read a lot of his work and I will sometimes mention morphogenetic fields, but it's kind of one of those things where I'm like, oh God, you need like, it just takes a lot to explain it maybe to people, but I feel like you probably have more experience and can do a good job of it. So why is it so important to clearly and specifically work with just the compassionate aspects of deities, and what does that have to do with morphogenetic fields?
Yes, it is a complicated topic. I'll try to do it justice. Well, a lot of people don't know that this is an option. So I think it can be really good to know. First of all, I was lucky that in my spiritual training, we started out with discernment in this regard. The term used was only for the highest good. Now only those who are for the highest good are who we work with. The reasons for this are that there's all types of spirits who have a right to exist and have their own MOs and ways, things that they want and need and ways they are in the world. And it has to do with what kind of relationship we want and what our boundaries are and what results we're kind of looking for. So one thing that can happen, though, especially with deity figures, I think it's especially important with deity figures or figures that have a history of human relationship, is the understanding that they have an essence, like we have an essence, like we may call our true self or maybe our most authentic self. And then there's a lot that can go into what we may call their broader field. So for example, with the god Odin has an essence. And he actually maybe has a very old essence. In the Voluspa poem, again, he is mentioned as one of the forces that's present at the creation of the world. And there's that aspect of him. And then there's the Marvel or whatever the franchise's movie aspect of him, right? And then all the treatments in between of who he is and what we think our relationship with is and who we think of him as a person. And what happens then is that there is also a field associated with him, a memory of all these ways, all of the ways in which he's been perceived and all the ways he's been interacted with. And if I just call on Odin, what I will probably get is a mix of that essence of Odin as well as the field of Odin. And personally, I'm not that interested in the field of Odin. No offense to Odin's field. But for me, working with their essence, working with their most authentic self, we use the term compassionate because that means the aspect of them that wants to be helpful, that wants to help humanity, which we tend to need. wise, the most knowledgeable and wise aspect of them. We can call on that aspect, because that aspect of them, first of all, will be the most helpful in my experience. It depends on, I guess, what you're asking for help with.
Right.
Will be helpful. They won't infringe upon your free will or boundaries, and they'll be healthy to interact with. So you're not going to be indebted to them. For example, there can be reciprocity, but you're not going to be indebted to them. They're not going to be negative. They're not going to be, they're going to be supportive and resourcing. And that's the kind of relationship I would really like. I really want in a relationship with spirits. And then you can get any range in between. With Odin too, there's there can be, or with the Norse beings maybe in general, there are some practices that do involve, some people do choose to surrender their will to the deity, the being. And so I don't want that element to be present in my personal interactions with them either, or that expectation or anything like that. So that's an example of something that can be in the field. So if I call on Odin and I'm not specific enough, and he starts to be like, well, become my thrall, then I'm going to be like, oh, not so much. And
Right.
let's redo this.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, no thanks, but no thanks. That, and not saying that can't be a valid path for people and they can't learn from that, or that's not choice, but that's not personally the relationship I want. So, so in that case, I would reset. And call on only the most wise and compassionate. I actually used to say only the most compassionate, but then I was talking to Loki, actually, who in his most wise and compassionate form is really awesome and funny. But what he said was like, you might want to say wise as well, otherwise you might get the dumb, compassionate versions of him. Which I have to say hadn't been a problem up to that point, but I was okay.
You also don't want to not take Loki's advice, because he was just telling you.
Exactly, the point taken.
Yeah.
And that does add an aspect to it. So it's kind of like, with humans, what do you want in a relationship with other humans? What are your requirements for that? What's healthy to you? What's nourishing and resourcing to you? And what's not? We can apply those parameters also to the spirit world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one way we can do it. We can be discerning with them. It's really important in healing work, in my experience, that discernment, because we want, everything to be clean and clear, not to have any other of these elements present. Mm-hmm. And it's also healthier for the individual. So sometimes when we work with spirits who are not only most wise and compassionate, not only for the highest good, there can be a toll. There's kind of like a price often that's paid, because there's usually some kind of energy exchange or contract of some kind. And that often down the road, at least, would lead to potential physical, and maybe even mental illness in extreme cases. And it can also actually impact our descendants too. A lot of what I do for work ends up being somewhat karmic cleanup, where when it was common for kind of agreements to be made with spirits of different types, that those agreements have there's effects, at some point, and there's usually consequences down the road. So I try to stay free of those.
So interesting you mentioned it. I was just in a text thread with friends today, and I said, it's so unsettling to live in the age of consequences. And they were like, whoa, that is when we're living. It's like, I know, right? And so interesting how that shows up even ancestrally. It makes a lot of sense to me. Those of us who feel that we're working epigenetically, even we're healing intergenerational trauma, but on multiple levels. It's like, it makes a lot of sense to me that people may have made all kinds of bargains and foxhole prayers, just like, help me out, and they don't end, they are binding. Yeah, that's so interesting. And so people could read about Rupert Sheldrake's work around morphogenetic fields, but essentially his research is about sort of trying to validate, verify, and investigate what is that field of Odin. Let's say he's not using that same language. He's talking about, other situations, but it's interesting because there's like also some positive aspects in terms of the field in some ways. Like, so for instance, if there's a field around Seidr, and then those of us who are learning a decade after others have kind of created this good field and are trying to do it in a respectful way, a discerning way, then those of us who are coming in a little later, we learn a lot quicker because that field makes those connections more explicit more quickly. And so there's a lot of, fascinating research that is going into this. So when we're talking about the field, it's like, it's not just some kind of new age term. At least that's my understanding of what Sheldrake is pointing at. It seems like you've incorporated that into your work too. Is that right?
Absolutely. And it's a concept that's used a lot in mediumship that I learned from Betsy Bergstrom as well. And what you said, I completely agree with. I was surprised that Seidr was potent. I was frankly, I had no association with anything European culturally based to have potency in my, I don't know. It was just, I don't know. I'm not saying that's the truth, the reality of things, but it was my expectation, at least going, and that was totally not the case. And the question is, why?
Right.
And I think it has to do with the field. It is a field we're tapping into. And then what we learn with mediumship practice is how to be selective about the fields. And anyone can do this. And what you just have to do is be specific in your language. What are you invoking specifically? What are your boundaries specifically? What's invited, what's not invited, right? And that invokes fields that, which is, I sometimes think of it as, in a sense that I'm programming the ethers in a way. What's around me, like what am I calling in, and what's the etheric environment going to be, and we can influence that by what fields we invoke and disinvite. Yeah.
I'm wondering now, how do you find your training in neurobiology helpful or unhelpful in your Seidr work, your spiritual practice? Because I'm hearing a lot of connections with, I guess when you're a hammer, everything's a nail, but I'm always like, oh, attachment or, trauma or whatever. It's like hard not to hear that way. How much neurobiology is this work being filtered through when you're doing your work?
I don't actually think about it all that much these days. I actually would be curious to go back and look at what current research is doing with the perspective I have now, and doing kind of a survey and overview of things from my current perspective. I think there's overlap in what I do, because when I think we talk about perception, of course, and even intuitive perception, the clairsenses, I think there's an aspect of neurobiology to that. The brain is a part of of course, our perception and our senses. But I don't really go much further than that these days, honestly. Yeah.
You're like, you all do your thing. I've moved on. Yeah.
Well, what was interesting, well, yeah, it's a different way of thinking. And I find that I kind of need the right sources and resources for it. And this I could say is true for anything that I look into these days, but I need it to speak to me in order to be able to spend time or want to spend time doing it. And so I am completely open to there being bridge people who are writing about these things, and I'm definitely interested in general, but I haven't been finding that. I've been kind of going in other directions, and a lot of my research energy was going into the Norse material for a long time, and now I'm looking into some other things, and so it's a little bit about energy allocation.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So as we're moving to close our time together, I wonder if there's a particular deity that you might call on to help you cope with things like grief or rage, or I'll state that another way. How might you work with primal emotions like that in your spiritual practice?
Yeah. So there's a few ways I can think of answering that. I think overall, what I do spiritually supports me in all the ways that I need in being a human. So what I have found in doing spiritual work and practice is that I feel really well resourced and supported with anything that's going on in my life. And I have been broken down and rebuilt a few times, and I know that I can be broken down and that I can rebuild. So when, for example, grief comes and ravages my reality, I know that I can surrender to it and that I'll be okay. And that I'm held by my ancestors and I'm held by the compassionate spirits. I'm not alone in that. When I feel strong anger, I feel like for me so I feel like those are two kind of different domains a bit. With grief, it's been a lot about surrender and allowing it to open me up. Which I think is kind of what it'll do if I let it. Even maybe kicking and screaming for a good portion of it and wanting it to be done. But I'm also aware, because I've been through major grief, I'm aware of the trajectory of it. And so that's one domain. And again, I feel like I can surrender more easily to it. I feel like being in grief is a spiritual experience in that way. If we, take that, again, make spirituality something that's not something separate from our day-to-day life and lifestyle. And then with anger, I feel like I'm also more supported. I can trust my anger more, I think, too, because I have felt like a sacred rage. I've felt what feels like really clean, authentic rage. And it felt different to me than what I would consider not so clean rage, which is how that can go a little bit, So I've also had that experience. I actually think of it, you talked about deities, I actually thought of it as a Durga moment, to be honest. Because I had a Durga moment where it was at my wit's end and I had this upflaring of this energy. And I was like, oh, this is a sacred boundary setting. This is boundary setting that's happening in a different way than I've been used to. And what stood out to me about it, again, was that it just felt really clean. Like I didn't feel like I was hurting the person involved, but I was just like, no. And there was such an energy behind it that it was just like, that's it. And that was it. And I would say then that inspires me to do is just to continue to chip away, at my own healing process, at my own spiritual development, because so that I can be more on those lanes. With anger, I can be more in that lane and be responsible with what I'm doing with it. Not in a way that's trying to censor myself or control myself, but again, I feel like now when I feel angry, I have the tools I need, I feel, to do good things with it and make it useful. And I would say, for me, the connection with my well ancestors it's a huge part in that. I feel held by them. Any of the compassionate spirits, really. But of course, with grief, I think the Sacred Mother energies can be really great with that, as well as oceanic deities. In the Norse, there's Ran, who's a goddess of the ocean, and the ocean has a tremendous capacity to hold us, or the earth has a tremendous capacity to hold things. It's kind of like you need bigger capacity, like what could hold what you're experiencing, and help you hold that. And then the moment I may not be aware of them, but I might just be like, someone help me, And I know, because of everything that I've done up to this point, that's there, even if I'm not as aware of it in the moment. Because when we're in the throes of things, we're just not going to be, I'm not going to be, I don't know. Our ability to tune in that way often is less, because our energy is going into where it's needed in that moment, which is whatever's happening. So
that is also useful, though. What a useful model, and also reassuring that anybody listening to this show is already at least in part, doing some of what would be needed. It's like keeping spirit at the center of your life, or just remembering that it's like an option as you stay in reciprocity with these compassionate forces. They're way more likely to be there for you and available to you, or at least you're way more likely to recognize them when you're like, someone help, Yeah. Well, Maris, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really love your work, and I'll be excited to put links to you and your upcoming offerings in the show notes. Thank you so much for sharing today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, see, for real, she's warm, she's brilliant, she has fascinating stories and research, and delivers it in such an accessible and compassionate way. I highly recommend you take any of Maris's courses when they come available. And lucky for you, it's coming up. So you can find this episode's show notes with links to the resources and writers and websites mentioned by Maris. You can find the show notes at numinouspodcast.com, and her excellent course called Gather at the Well, Norse Ritual Animism, starts January 6th. So head to numinouspodcast.com for links. Domo arigato to my 24 listeners in Japan. You know what? You are not all located in Tokyo, as one might assume. You're actually all over the country. So my listener shout out is going to folks in Japan. You should definitely have a meetup over Zoom. I bet you get like 15 to 20 people or something show up. I'm guessing a lot of you are teaching English over there. But if not, if you are actually a bona fide native Japanese speaker, you should post about listening to this episode on Instagram and tag me, because I would have a follow-up question for you. Are you a rose lover? Because, there are a lot of, like me, hardcore David Austin English Rose fans in Japan who I follow on Instagram. So I would be curious if you and I are in some very small, unique Venn diagram of lovers of David Austin roses and intuition development and like collapse psychology. I think that's my crowd. Are we each other's people? Like, should we, I feel like we should do something sometime. Anyway, konnichiwa, Japan. I super appreciate you spending time with me. So friends, as I mentioned at the top of the show, this holiday season, I am once again doing my 12 Days of Yuletide folk celebration, formerly known as the Yuletide Stocking Stuffer. So it's 12 daily micro rituals and mini meditations that you can easily fit into your busy day. Even like do it as a family. So the first episodes actually have already been released. They're ready for listening, just to help you get oriented. So you actually get more than like the 12 days. There's like 4 other small episodes that just kind of like get you started. And then this weekend, Saturday, December 18th, under the full moon, I'm leading some ritual and trance work that will be all about filling your cup with soothing goodness so you can experience a bit of rest and renewal. On the 19th, I'm demonstrating how to make a fancy garland and beautiful wire-framed wreath. And on the evening of December 20th, I'm leading a cozy candlelit somatic practice to help de-stress and downshift the nervous system. Then, from solstice on December 21st to New Year's Day, you'll receive a daily private podcast full of folk customs and suggestions for self-directed rituals. And I guess I would say the people who really love this program tend to be like folks estranged from family, either by choice or circumstance. They really enjoy this. Folks feeling kind of lonely or wanting some consistent contact nutrition for a couple of weeks. Folks who hate capitalist Christmas and want to celebrate something like more meaningful and craft their own traditions. And people with small kids who are trying to help instill some core values, around like compassion and nurturance and reverence for ancestors or lineage, or stewardship, like earth stewardship, or kind of an animist approach. Maybe even frugality or like experience-based celebrations instead of gift-focused traditions, or co-constructed meaning through ritual practice, that kind of thing. Anyway, everything is included in the price of membership, and you're welcome to just sign up for 1 month and then cancel. I get it. It's fine. You can't just sign up for one workshop or course. No, you have to join the network, which is basically a very friendly events calendar. Or it's like a gym membership, but it's like the YMCA gym, not like Soul Cycle, or I don't know if that's a gym, or like some, it's not like some aspirational lifestyle brand yoga gym. It's the Y, okay? It's not Clubhouse. It's the equivalent of the Y, circa like 1998, when you took that flamenco dance class that time with the first openly gay man in his 50s you'd ever met. He had braces. He said over and over, pick the apple, bite the apple, throw the apple down. And he said he loved that lipstick color on you. And since you just recently started wearing lipstick, you like immediately went back to Eaton's department store makeup counter and bought 3 more of the same shade of lipstick because it seemed quite sophisticated to you to be complimented by your gay flamenco dance teacher because, you were a 23-year-old parentified child, desperate for whatever tiny token of adult care you could get. So you soaked up that shit like a cactus in summer. And he was right. That type of brick red shade looks amazing with your skin tone, just like your Color Me Beautiful swatch indicated it would. You're a spring. You need warm reds, just like you need some rest and relaxation, but also some good company this winter. So I hope I'll see you in the Numinous Network, my friend. Let's cozy up for some Yuletide festivities. It'll be like the History Channel meets HGTV meets that very unique Venn diagram I mentioned earlier. If that's your jam, come find me. You'll find all the details at carmenspanyola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.